Do they have a big group?
Yeah.
They do. But do they have a big group? All right, we've got our technical difficulties fixed. We're ready to.
Okay. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be in the picture here because the presentation is not mine, but I am the director of the Carbon County Museum here in Rawlins. I appreciate you all for joining us virtually, and we have several folks here in person here at the Higher Ed Center here in Rawlins. So we're actually really excited to have our two speakers here today. First off, we have Christine Pitcher Ross has lived in several different states and traveled extensively abroad, and she considers Wyoming her home. And Chris was born in Laramie and graduated high school in Cody. She attended the University of Wyoming. As an education major, she student taught in Torrington, after which she enrolled in graduate school again at the University of Wyoming. After marrying her husband, Bill, and living in the Chicago area, the couple eventually settled in Denver. And during holidays and vacations, they spent delightful times visiting Chris's parents, Goldie and Chet Pitcher, who own the property at Arlington, Wyoming. Chris was a language arts teacher in Denver schools for 23 years, and tales of her escapades in Wyoming amused and fascinated her urban students. And truthfully, most of them had never visited another state, much less Wyoming, just to the north of them. Today, Chris, Bill, and their adult offspring, Will Ross and Beth Calloway, both Wyoming residents, continue the tradition of caretaking the property at Arlington and enjoying its beauty, lifestyle, and heritage. Chris is proud to present the book Arlington, the Dixon Legacy, on behalf of her mother, the author, Goldie Pitcher. And then our other speaker is Donna Fischer. Donna was born in Cody, Wyoming at the end of World War II. And because her father worked for Marathon Oil Company's operations, she went to many Wyoming grade schools. She graduated from Cody High School and went to the University of Wyoming when women wore heels to class and had curfews. Her earliest memories are of Arlington, since she was brought there shortly after birth, and has been actively involved in the preservation of Arlington her entire life. As a result of her Wyoming education, she became a language arts educator, then a publisher's representative for over 20 years. She is also an audiologist, which means testing hearing and fitting of hearing aids. She enjoys retirement and is active at Windsor Gardens in Denver with chorus art and building activities. She has 2 adopted children from East India. Being in a mixed-race family has a unique perspective on human interaction, and she believes walking in other guys' shoes is always the best. This is what Goldie told us as children. Donna stays informed in this era with internet, TV, books, and radio. So without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Chris, and she's going to start our presentation. And I'm just going to, since we're kind of jumping back between two different computers, I'm going to be kind of turning the mic off on one and the camera off on one so that the slides don't get mixed up.
Maybe Area of Wyoming called Arlington. First, our thanks to Robin Everett and Tom Mensick for inviting us. And just one little housekeeping thing, if you could wait on the questions until the end, we would appreciate it. And now my sister Donna.
The opening of this book is a vignette of historical fiction of a pioneer mother with a sick child. Goldie was a skilled writer of both nonfiction and fiction. The vignette was based on our childhood, where we lived through many episodes of The Crew.
I accidentally shut it down.
Chris being the crew bee, and I being her companion under the steam tent.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had a friend who, when she learned I was from Wyoming, she remarked, "Oh, God lives up there." Besides God, the Native American tribes in the Arlington area were the Plains Indians, the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. They were here from the very beginning. As children, we would play among the teepee rings that were on a ridge outside of Arlington, and we used a large round stone with its middle etched out for a doorstop. We thought it was probably a Native American horse hobble. By 1811, the Arapaho had allied with the Cheyenne and expanded their hunting territory.
Next slide.
As you take the Arlington exit off Interstate 80, you will exit into history. It is a site known as the Rock Creek Crossing or Rockdale, situated on the Overland Trail. In 1882, the federal government established the Rockdale Post Office, also at the site. After 1902, the post office name was changed to Arlington. The first Fremont survey came through about 1842. John C. Fremont's explorations of the West in the 1840s were undertaken with the sponsorship of the United States government to expand the boundaries of the country, to make maps for Americans who wanted to settle in the area, and to notify Great Britain and Mexico that the U.S. intended to expand its borders all the way to the Pacific. The expedition started in the summer of 1842 and explored the wind rivers of the Rockies, examined the Oregon Trail through the South Pass, and reported on the rivers and the fertility of the lands. The photo is of the Hayden Party at Arlington, which passed through the area in 1869. This party was creating maps for the USGS. The Overland Trail. As we all know, the common route for travelers west was the Oregon Trail, which was north of what became the Overland Trail. The first recorded travelers were General William H. Ashley and a group of trappers in 1822, headed for their rendezvous. They were the first white men known to travel what was to become the famous Overland Trail. For a while, it was known as the Cherokee Trail, after a party of Cherokees who crossed the trail in 1849, surprisingly enough, en route to the California goldfields. Indian pressures increased on the Oregon Trail, especially after broken treaties and the Sand Creek Massacre of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho in 1864. These occurrences made the Overland Trail a more attractive route. In 1862, Ben Halliday purchased the contract for the Overland Stage, and he moved its route to the Cherokee Trail, and the route soon became known as the Overland Trail. So on the map, the Overland Trail route lasted until about 1868, and it is in the red. It's the route in the red, and if you look up a little past the Laramie River, you will see Rock Creek, and of course, that's us. The historical marker erected by Inez Cortez for a long time, in fact, as long as I can remember, it was there. It was erected in 1914, and it stood across the lane close to the old dance hall, bar, and blacksmith shop built between 1860 and 1864.
This is important information. Maybe for some of you, it will be review, maybe brand new information, but it does have an impact on the Arlington area and the Dixon family. The Homestead Act. It was enacted in 1862 to 1916. It helped shape Wyoming into what it is today. The head of the household, at least 21 years of age, could file on 160 acres of land. If improved upon in 5 years, he, and it usually was a he, could prove up, and the land was his. It was part of other laws passed from 1820 to 1916, encouraging people to settle the lands. The legacy of the Dixon family begins with people from this family tree on the screen. Marshall and Margaret Dixon arrived in the 1880s. Margaret, of course, was his wife. They had 4 children. Alvy Dixon, one of the main characters of this book, actually the main character, I would say. He married Minnie Elting in 1896. They had Joe, who married Mary, Ivora, and Anna. And it's important for you to know about these characters because they are mentioned further. Per Maxine LeBeau, who provided much information and information from the 1976 account of Edith Dixon Brokaw. Marshall and Margaret began their family in Bloomington, Illinois. When their children, Alva, Ivora, Joseph, and Anna were small, they moved to Carthage, Missouri. There, they had run a grocery store and bought a farm. As the children reached their teens, their mother became ill, and the doctor advised them to go to a higher altitude. Renting the farm, the family outfitted wagons for the trip west. They tied the milk cow behind their wagon and made their way to their new home. They arrived in Colorado several weeks later and began freighting from Colorado Springs and Manitou to the mines and sawmills nearby. 4 years later, Mrs. Dixon's health was so improved that they decided to return to the farm in Missouri. The 2 boys, Alvy and Joseph, made plans to go to Arizona, but eventually the whole family was convinced to move west again. It is estimated that they traveled 1,500 miles back and forth before settling at last in Wyoming. To continue the family tree, and these characters are in the book, these human being characters. Alvy and Minnie had children, and these are their children and their spouses' names. Again, they're important, so it's just kind of an overview. Edith was born in 1897. She married Ralph Brokaw. Lloyd was born in 1898. He married Sue Smith. Charlotte was born in 1901. She became the wife of Al Rosenlieb. Margaret, 1903, married Arch LeBeau. And their 5th child, Alpha May, was born in 1904 and unfortunately did not live even a year. Alvy lost his wife and became the stepfather to 2 young children. Alvy married our grandmother, Donna's and mine, Rosemary Pitcher. She was a mother of 2 children, Eunice and Chester Ellery Pitcher, born in 1912 and passed away in 2008. Goldie Morton, our mother, the author of this book, became his wife. She was born in 1916 and died in 2009. It's important back to the Dixons and the Acreage and the Homestead Act to understand how that impacted them. Marshall filed 160 acres in 1880 under the Homestead Act. Margaret filed for 200 acres under the Desert Land Act. Joe and Alvy, the two boys, filed for 160 acres each in 1903. Joe died in 1910. Alvy bought Joe's half, and the acres start to build up. And now my sister.
The Dixon family patriarch was Marshall Holland Dixon, and here is a photograph of him right before his death in 1903. If we look at the picture here, we went from 160 acres. The Dixon land grew to 34,186 acres at the time of Alvy's death. So this is what the land he acquired looked like at the time, and this is what the land still looks like today. He became one of the most successful ranchers in Wyoming. So we see Arlington's portion of Rock Creek. In the 1880s, Rock Creek was known as a stream, but described as a river later on. Rock Creek ran all the way down the valley through the Dixon properties. It was a steady source of water at the site and also down the Rock Creek Valley, hidden away by trees and undergrowth. It was safer from attack, close to timber to build buildings, a source of rocks also for buildings, and a source of game for food. Also, Rock Creek supplied ice the year round. Ice was important. I remember sleds on the property that Chris and I tried to preserve. They were large with great iron runners. Ice for use at Arlington, carved in blocks from Rock Creek, was towed on sleds to the ice house, snow packed in between the cracks, and the entire pile insulated with sawdust. Solid cakes of this frozen water thus lasted until fall. Even with 2-foot double walls insulated with sawdust, the ice house still required cementing with snow and sawdust covering. However, hunks of ice brought into the house ice box had to be painstakingly brushed off. But if that welcome lemonade in the summer had a few grains of wood in it, who cared? Also, Alvy and Rosemary later on built a second blacksmith shop in 1924, where brands, repairs on wagon wheels, and machinery, tools, and etc. were made. A walk-in cooler on the west end featured an ice box, refrigerated by blocks of ice carved from the creek. Again, the layers insulated with sawdust.
Alvy puts down roots in Wyoming. Alva, mostly called Alvy Dixon, liked to say that as a bachelor, when he rode up Rock Creek in 1888 at age 25, his entire possessions were his bedroll, frying pan, and a 6-shooter. That humble beginning launched a legacy rich with a cast of characters. This is a picture of Alvy at Arlington returning from his mail route. That was one of several jobs he had in order to make ends meet in the very beginning. This is a painting done by my son in watercolor and pencil. That's the cover of the book. He made it into color, obviously. To quote from the book, Alvy also worked for wages on the Courier and Diamond ranches nearby, or on tie drives on the Medicine Bow River, not to mention his stint with the government survey party in the Snowy Range of Wyoming. Later, he delivered mail from Rockdale, former name for Arlington, to Lookout, south of Highway 30, north of Cooper Lake, driving a team when weather permitted, or riding horseback through raging storms. There are many personalities behind this property. Numerous books, articles, and pamphlets have been written about this area of Wyoming. This book, however, is about the people associated with the land. Now we will share excerpts from Mother's book to give you insights into Goldie's writing style, talent, and personality. Our choices are intended to bring those who helped shape the legacy to life. One such character in the history of Arlington came to be called Aunt Mary. From the book, like Alvy, Joe Dixon took a wife, a woman of true Western spirit, who became Aunt Mary to everyone on Rock Creek. Aunt Mary used salty language, loved to tease young folks with slightly embarrassing tales, and became one of the legends of the creek. Living alone after Joe's death in a small house built for her by Lewis Hanson of McFadden, her claim that she could outfish anyone on Rock Creek was probably true. She spent a lot of time at it and sometimes walked about 9 miles to go fishing. With her ever-present corncob pipe and bamboo fishing pole, she most likely did outfish everyone on the creek in her time. She was more comfortable in overalls, black hat, and a man's jacket, but could, at rare times, don long, simple dresses and a bonnet. Aunt Mary was said to have had a sunny disposition and loved to play pinochle all hours of the night whenever she could persuade someone to stay for a long game. And judging from her pictures, she either forgot to wear her teeth or didn't have any. I and my family inherited her cabin, which still stands today, and honors her memory with a plaque that simply says, Aunt Mary's. She died in that cabin in 1926. A quote from the book reads, meanwhile, Alvy purchased other homesteads, among them the John Cullum homestead in 1897, and larger tracts to increase his cattle herd. His ditches, headgates, fences, and hay pens, as shown, and outbuildings stood for many years after his death. Innovative, he was the first to build permanent hay pens to replace the wire that was used to encircle and contain haystacks. The wire had to be removed with each new crop. He also patented his idea for concrete railroad ties to replace the wooden ones that were constantly attacked by termites. Interestingly, these same concrete supports are still being used. And now my sister.
Many adjectives describe Alvy Dixon: smart, good-looking, perfectionist, skilled builder, and impeccably honest. This is from the book. Fortune smiled when oil was discovered on the Alvy Dixon Ranch in 1917, creating a boom in Rock River and for Alvy. As a result of his good luck, he was instrumental in founding a bank built on a parcel of land that had been part of a larger tract sold to Albany School District Number 5 in 1912. In 1919, the school district sold Lot 1 to Alvy Dixon and his friend Fred. In June 1921, the First National Bank of Rock River came into being. Alvy Dixon was president, with many local citizens hired as officers and a cashier. 4 years later, on April 11th, 1923, the bank closed its doors after its vice president and cashier was charged with embezzlement and misappropriation of several $1,000s of the bank's funds. Having traded good certificates for inferior ones, Fred was convicted in March 1924 and sentenced to Leavenworth, Kansas. The only known person credited with paying back some of the lost funds was Alvy Dixon. Another example of the inherent honesty of Alvy was in his purchase of the Cullum property. Alvy bought the land a little at a time because Cullum said he needed the money, because Alvy also now owned the mineral right when Alvy Dixon Well Number 1 brought in oil. Alvy gave a certain amount of money received to Cullum in addition to what he'd already paid him, simply because this was a windfall for Alvy, and having sold, Cullum was missing out. Yeah, we missed one here. Sparing neither himself nor his hired hands of long hours of labor to maintain and improve the ranch, it took large crews to run this vast operation. This is a quote from the book. Alvy was nevertheless respected by his men. One such hand was credited with a remark, quote, "I don't know what color it is or what Alvy's house looks like outside. We leave for work before daylight and we come back after dark." Alvy was also a strong believer in education. He was instrumental in establishing the community's first school in 1895 in Section 16, Township 19, Range 78, probably northeast of Rockdale. With the cooperation of other ranchers, logs were hauled from the mountains, other materials provided, and the first pupils were enrolled in 1896. The Dixon children all received their 8 years of elementary schooling within those walls. Alvy encouraged all parents to consider longer and regular attendance. The one-room school was used until 1915. As I said before, he loved to build. Most of his buildings still stand. A blacksmith shop built in 1924, 2 milk barns, woodshed large enough to hold a wagon, slaughterhouse on the right, built in 1927, the second family home at Arlington, ice houses, a garage, and a coal house. Here is the building of the second home, and Alvy stands between the 2 windows there that you see. This started in 1944 and was completed in 1937, and we'll discuss why later.
As we understand it, this is one of the first homes of the Dixon family, but it is not located at Arlington. Further information regarding the Homestead Act kind of gives a little bit more information. From the Wyoming Livestock Roundup, September 30th, 2022. The Alvy Dixon Ranch was homesteaded in 1888 by the Marshall and Margaret C. Dixon family. The ranch found its resting place on the upper Rock Creek Valley in Carbon County. Marshall filed on 160 acres and became the Brokaw Ranch. And sons Alvy and Joe filed on an adjoining 160 tracts. The north half of Section 10, Range 19, Township 78, roughly 2 miles southwest of present-day McFadden. Without the union of Alvy and Minnie Dixon, her maiden name was Elting, this would be a different story. This obviously is their wedding day, April 19th, 1896. The people's story from that family tree referred to earlier are very important, and information about these people will follow. Edith, born again in 1897, Lloyd 1898, Charlotte 1901, Margaret 1903, and of course Alpha May, who died in 1905. There are few pictures available of the Dixon children in the Dixon family, furthermore. However, this is one of Alvy's 3 grown children. From left, we have Margaret, then Lloyd, the only son, Alvy, Edith, and Charlotte, who is unfortunately not pictured. We'll share brief information about the girls first, the girls of the family first. And we start with Edith Dixon Brokaw, 1897 to 1990. A little bit about her. Edith served on the election board in McFadden. And with her first voting experience at age 21, she rode from the home ranch, the picture I showed earlier, to Arlington, where she had to spend the rest of the day because Alvy was an election judge. She married Ralph Brokaw, and they operated a ranch together until the middle 1950s. They had two sons, Howard and Leland. Ralph died in 1961, and Edith and her son took over ranching.
Charlotte Pearl was born in 1901 and passed away in 1992. She was a graduate of Laramie High School, a graduate of the University of Wyoming. She married Al Rosenleib. She lived in Arlington after her marriage, but later on moved to Bakersfield, California, where she passed away. Margaret, the youngest, was born in 1903 and passed away in 1999. She graduated from the University of Wyoming in 1923, returned to the ranch to teach school in McFadden, served on the board for 17 years, mostly as president. She married Arch LeBeau in 1926, lived most of her life on the home ranch, and worked for Alvy as the bookkeeper. She had two sons. They had two sons, Lawrence and Gerald, and 3 generations of LeBeaus have lived on the LeBeau Ranch since the original log home was built. Also, she remembered riding sleds and wagons between Rock River and the ranch, some 12 miles, and the angst of being stranded overnight aboard a passenger train stalled in the old snow shed at Rock River. She also climbed to the top of the Medicine Bow Peak, and she sold ice cream in a parlor at Arlington. After their mother's death, the Dixon girls had a lot of jobs fall to them. And here we see the original Wildwood Inn, which was still in operation. They performed many chores, kitchen and house cleaning duties. And as I mentioned earlier, this ice cream was sold and sundries to travelers at the Wildwood Inn. However, one fateful night, Chet Pitcher had been discharged from the Navy. When coming home from Laramie in July 1934, he could see flames shooting from the mountains ahead. As he drove, he said to himself, "I'm sure glad that's not our place." As home got close, the flames and the smoke did too. He arrived in time to help save the piano, including the very same vase Rosemary hated, resting safely on its top. A sewing machine and a few other items were also saved. The inn had burned to the ground. Gone forever were the history of the Wildwood Inn, and the irreplaceable memorabilia and photographs went with it. As you look at this picture, you see perhaps 8 men that are raking up. And on the far right there, that gentleman that's bent over, that is probably Alvy. Lloyd Dixon, born in 1898 and passed away in 1988. We used to visit Lloyd and his wife Sue in their retirement home in Laramie. I remember him as tall and lean and having a very ample head, silver hair, and he was quite good looking at around age 65. He was, as you can see, he was a prolific writer. He recorded much of his life, some of which is archived at the University of Wyoming Historical Center. He married Sue Smith, as mentioned before. Here's one of his stories, and he was good at telling stories. He was given an old bucking horse from Arbuckle's horse ranch. The horse was said to be gentle. Lloyd said that his dad never believed old Pintle was a bucking horse in the first place. Quote, "One day in the rain, the horse threw me off while jumping a ditch. I limped into the house to tell my father. He said, 'He didn't buck.' But after father got on and was nearly bucked off, that made a believer out of him." Another quote from Lloyd. "Later, I rode in a few relay races at local rodeos, including at Arlington, and patented a saddle with a stirrup on the cinch, which unhooked when you change the saddle onto another horse. This gave me 3 to 4 seconds over the other riders who couldn't compete with regulation saddles. At last, Lloyd confessed, I changed the whole program from the way my father operated after I started my operation on my own. And when I did away with that, I thought everything that was necessary and unnecessary, I found out later on they were the proper way to do it.
It's important to note that a few years after the birth of the Dixon children, the author, Goldie Morton, was born in Sandpoint, Idaho in 1916. She graduated high school in Red Lodge, Montana. She was outstanding in general business courses and English literature and composition. She loved to play piano, draw, dance, sing beautiful harmony, and write. Lloyd had many skills like his father and many talents. And in Lloyd's words, he'll explain. I have several patents on the old slide stacker. By way of explanation, it was once used to stack hay pins. By installing rollers on the push pole, wheels under the stacker, and poles at the top of the stacker to tear bunches of hay up so that they could be easier to push around on the stack. I've watched haying, but I've never understood this part. Later on, Lloyd said in the book, my stacking career consisted of, at one point, stacking 20 200-ton stacks in one day. Furthermore, Lloyd built the first mechanical hay seeder that was used in Wyoming during the First World War, and he built more to help other ranchers. He also had a patent on a dehorner, which proved to be too expensive to build. However, it was cheap enough that ranchers could build their own. The family dynamic changes. At only age 48, Minnie Dixon passed away in 1915. Margaret Dixon recalled that she watched the day as she watched her mother taken away by horse and buggy and never returned. Margaret was 12, Edith 18, Lloyd 17, and Charlotte was 13. Alvy married again. His children were grown now, and Alvy often visited family and friends in Colorado and Missouri. On one of his trips, he met a widow, Rosemary Taylor Pitcher, who was a single mother of 2. She managed a cafeteria in Colorado Springs. She was also a tough survivor of polio. They were married at the Connor Hotel in Laramie in 1924. Rosemary was 40. Alvy was 61. We have no idea what the wedding looked like, but we're pretty sure that the wedding ring was from a pawn shop. Here's a picture of Rosemary and the cafeteria crew in Colorado Springs, and our grandmother is peeking out from behind. She's the 4th from the left.
It was a hard life for Rosemary as a single mother of 2 children and having to work to earn money for the family. She worked in Arkansas and later in Colorado. She had been a widow for 10 years. Her previous husband, having died before my dad was born. In this picture, his sister Eunice is 14 and dad is about 10. Rosemary was 38 in this picture. Here's a picture of our father on the old wooden bridge that crosses Rock Creek in Arlington. We're not sure his age there. It was quite an adjustment for him. He had moved to Wyoming at age 12. He looked forward to a change in his lifestyle, and that he really got. Little did he know how difficult it would be. Here is a picture of Alvy and Eunice's stepdaughter at the woodshed he created that held a wagon. We know he was a builder, and that came with skills and tools. Alvy was an excellent blacksmith. As a rancher, he had to be in those days. At work in his shop, which was fully equipped with tools of the era, pieces almost ready for welding and to be worked were sprinkled with a spoonful of borax to clean the part. Then the bond was made. He was good at tempering coal shovels and an expert with a foot adze, a hand-cutting tool having its blade at right angles with its handle usually curved, used for dressing the timber and making it flat so it would fit. And I did research it, and you do this. That's how you use that. Okay. The finished piece looked like it had gone through a planing mill. This is a quote from Chet Pitcher. He kept it sharp as a razor, and anyone who used his adze was in trouble. He was a perfectionist. You had to do it right, and you had to keep busy. So now we have a blended family. And if you look to the left, you will see Charlotte and then Alvy. There's Rosemary and Edith with Ralph and Leland. Brokaw. Naturally, we have new women in the family and we have new stories. Let's put it this way. When my grandmother Rosemary was happy, she was delightful. But when she got irritated, it was a whole different story. Charles and Annie Chrismore were the first to run Sand Lake Lodge, and they would take a cabin at Arlington on the off season. That meant that Annie would hang around Rosemary. Rosemary sold cream, butter, and eggs produced by chicken factory farms and painstakingly raised hens and a rooster from buttery, yellow, fluffy chicks. At least those who survived being crammed in the crates. Inevitably, some chickens arrived at Arlington dead or sick after being sidetracked en route too long. It was either cold or the heat. Their arrival usually preceded a snowstorm, which meant they had to be nursed near the kitchen range. As Rosemary sorted the sick and the dying from the healthier ones, Anna Chrismore nearly always managed to be on hand during the culling, pointing with a long accusing finger. She would solemnly announce, "This one's gonna die, that one's gonna die." Much to Rosemary's irritation.
Sue Smith Dixon was a red-haired dynamo from Chicago. She married Lloyd in 1922. Here we see Sue from the left with the fur on her shoulder, Lloyd, Alvy, and Rosemary. My memories of Sue Dixon are that the atmosphere somehow changed as she arrived at Arlington. Two quotes from the book are as follows. The young rancher and the Chicago belle, which is where she was from, married in the original Wildwood Inn at Arlington, September 21st, 1922. The newlyweds moved first to the Fischer property, where Lloyd had built a house a year or two before. Later, they relocated at the end crops. Although Rosemary seemed to bond most closely with stepson Lloyd over the years, she met her match in his wife, the equally strong-willed, opinionated Sue. Both best described as imperious women, the two clashed off and on. Yet the families joined for holiday meals, most often at Arlington, and usually ended with someone mad at somebody. Still, Sue would be the first on hand in times of crisis for anyone in the valley. This imposing, self-assured, outspoken woman often served as benefactor, whether the beneficiary wanted help or not. Among Chet Pitcher's memories, we were always first out in the morning and last in at night. We would start on another round when the other hands went in to eat supper. Alvy would wake me up in the wee hours with, "Time to get up, laddie buck," to round up the horses. There were always 4 or 5 horses that couldn't be found in the morning, and I had to harness 2 and have another 2 ready to take over at noon, because you couldn't mow all day with just one team. For a whole haying season, driving, mowing, wrangling horses, a horse to break, and a steer to raise, I got $30. Chester Ellery Pitcher and Goldie Nora Morton were married in 1939 in Cody, Wyoming. And then came the war. Life changed a lot for Goldie. As she wrote in the book, "I joined Chet in Port Angeles, Washington, and Noroton Heights, Connecticut, until he was sent overseas. Our first child, Donna Rose, was on the way when he was shipped overseas, and I returned to Cody to live with my mother, a widow, and grandmother. Donna was born in Cody, Wyoming. Because Rosemary was alone on the ranch after Alvy's death in 1944, I brought my 3-month-old daughter there to help her, and any independence for this author was over. This highly intelligent, creative, and capable young woman had no vote about where she might prefer to live with her baby daughter. Such were the times." Another example of mother's command of the language is as follows. Adapting to ranch life was not easy. She said, "I was about as privy to ranch life as a cow to a tea party. So in the early years and my first contact with the tom turkey, well, we didn't exactly have a bonding experience. This one, hand raised by Rosemary, allowed full range in the yard, held a grudge against most humanity, especially of the female persuasion. My attempts to go outside were met by a furiously squawking gobbler, wings in full mast. I had no idea whether he planned to peck me to death or hammer me to a pulp with those big feet, nor did I want to find out. After 2 days of retreat, Rosemary stopped being amused. Handing me a broom, she ordered me to go have it out with the feathered bully. Cautiously and fearfully, I looked for my nemesis, but not for long. As soon as I appeared, he charged furiously. So, okay, I swung just as furiously at him and connected. That bird would have been too bruised for the table, and his ego was badly battered as well. We avoided each other following that."
Well, the women were on their own. And Goldie's wit, here's another example. I would title this, "A Fancy Meal." On a weekend, Rosemary decided to visit friends at Hannah, Wyoming. Eunice and I held down the fort. When friend Lucille Good of McFadden joined us unexpectedly, the cupboards were bare of everything but staples. No problem. Eunice decided to serve stewed chicken for the guest. A hitch. The meal was running around in the yard in good health. My sister-in-law had never killed a chicken, nor were Lucille and I about to, much less she had cleaned or even plucked one. But Eunice rose to the occasion. Her intended victim rose also, squawking, fearful flight, with Eunice hot on its tail. Finally captured, now removing its head presented another challenge. The axe wielded by an almost hysterical executioner hit the chopping block, missing its goal entirely. Whack after whack after whack. At last, cleaned, plucked, and in the pot, the bird had its revenge at the table. She had to be the toughest fowl ever served the world over. We know that from Wyoming. We know that would be the case, don't we? Albert passed away November 27th, 1944. Rosemary became a rancher's widow, and Chet was discharged in October 1945, and he met his 7-month-old daughter at last. The first time he tried to hold her, she screamed like a banshee. She was among undoubtedly many babies who had to learn to love their returning daddies. Now Chet resumed work in McFadden, and Rosemary went to Arkansas for the winter. Chet resumed work starting in the McFadden oil field. His career went on to be employed with Ohio Oil Company for over 30 years. Having come up from the ranks as a derrick man, a floor man, a tool pusher, with a brief stint in uranium strip mining in the Dakotas, eventually he became production supervisor in the Oregon Basin field in Cody, Wyoming, and in the McFadden field. Here he is pictured with men in the crew. Perhaps some of you recognize these names. On the left is Ted Van Cleve, Harold Hoopman, Chester Pitcher, Bob Newkirk, and Merle Moncrief. And this is probably in the 1950s. So time passes. From the book, Alvy had passed away years ago, and Rosemary did not follow him in death until October 4, 1970. That very day, peace and quiet on the old trail was also to be no more. Just as I-80 was dedicated, the call came from Fort Smith, Arkansas, that she had joined her husband. Alvy's 160-acre ranch had grown to be one of the largest in the West. It was reported that at his passing, he, his wife Rosemary, and his son Lloyd and wife Sue had acquired over a township of land. Now, let's see if you recognize some of these people. Of course, I was there. Don't look at me. Especially the person with the arrow, Stan Hathaway. And I believe right behind him, that was Ed Hirschler, I think. Yeah, not sure. Not sure.
And why did those dignitaries arrive at Arlington? Interstate 80 was dedicated October 4th, 1970. And here is our mother with the arrow underneath the arrow at that dedication. We think perhaps it was that occasion with the dedication of Interstate 80 at the barnyard at Arlington, that this was one of the few times that Alvy's children, spouses, and stepson and the author were gathered. One of the last times the blended family was pictured together. Again, approximately 1970, we're not sure. From the left, we have Lloyd Dixon, then Goldie Pitcher, Sue Dixon, or I'm sorry, Edith Dixon Brokaw, Margaret Dixon LeBeau, Sue Dixon, Charlotte Dixon Rosenlieb, Chet Pitcher, and in front, Ray Rosenlieb. A little bit about the author. Goldie, 1916 to 2009, was an award-winning writer whose resume included weekly newspaper columns and feature reporting for the Cody Enterprise, Rawlins Daily Times, Lusk Herald, Laramie Boomerang, and Billings Gazette. Her first book, McFadden, The Town They Called Camp, was published in 2002. It's quite often mentioned that Arlington is the only place, people say, that we can come back to that has never changed. Our mother summarizes best for us. With most of the old buildings still intact on this portion of the Overland Trail, Arlington remains a monument to the past and retains the aura of a time when men were men, women were women, and the twain met when both worked shoulder to shoulder. They were building whatever their lives were to be, sometimes against insurmountable odds. All of the people who lived or worked or were raised at Arlington are indelibly etched in the ambiance of old Arlington. They are themselves true legends, as well as the generations newly established and yet to come. Even the intrusion of the modern wind turbines now standing tall on the ridge above cannot blow away the memories embraced in the old buildings. These all commemorate the shaping of Arlington by the pioneers who traversed or stayed on the Overland Trail the hard way. And so ends our introduction to the book, Arlington, the Dixon Legacy. We have books available through the website. We have a few handouts for those of you in the audience. We also have a few books on hand as well. And now we have time for a few questions, if there are any.
Let me throw it on the, so I think the moderators on the other end are going to share questions from their group. And then if you have questions too, you can direct them to me and I can speak, ask you guys. So let me get this back up here and then, all right, I'll have you and Donna get up here and be on camera.
Yeah, be on camera. Here we are.
So yeah, I think we're ready for questions from your audience if you have them. Also, if anyone, let me just start. Actually, let me take questions from in the room here since it's a little, there's fewer people. So does anyone have any questions from in person?
Why did they decide to name it Arlington?
We have no idea.
We don't know.
Was it perhaps assigned by the post office?
That's our guess because when the federal government came along, then they called it Arlington. So we assume that could have been what happened.
There were lots of rocks. And so maybe that's where it came from, was it was too confusing. But we've tried to find out, but we've never been able to find out.
What happened to what happened to the ranch? Is it still intact? Has it been split up? What's happened?
It has been split up because of the children and because of Alvy marrying again, Rosemary, and so the huge amount of land has been divided up. Yeah, inherited.
So it's still in family.
Yes,
Pretty much.
That's nice.
our father inherited the part called Arlington.
Any questions from the virtual group?
You guys have any questions here? You're not gonna close a hard one for your mouth?
I maybe to eliminate the process, a question could be, was all this history, oral history, or also researched? How did Goldie have it?
As we understand it, it was research. She did a lot of work. The oral histories that you hear towards the end when we're talking about things that she really experienced, stories she was telling that she was there and a witness to.
Yeah, and she did invite members of the Dixon family, all of the relatives that she could get a hold of to share their stories.
My aunt, but not my mom. That was a question from Beth.
Oh, my daughter.
So she has to ask a question, right?
Oh, yeah,
You said it, yeah.
absolutely.
So how long did she work on this project?
A long time. It was a long time. And by that time, mother was getting quite up in age. And so it was a little difficult for her, but she was tenacious and she kept at it until she got most of the information gathered and was quite a ways into the book. She passed away.
Well, she was working, I know she was working at 92, still working, right?
Any plans to finish it?
Oh, she wanted it finished and we told her we would finish.
We promised her we'd finished it.
How close are
Finish
you? Are you guys close?
Uh,
Got it.
I think it's here.
More, a little more? Well, I saw
Right there.
introduction. So I didn't know if there was
Yeah,
any more.
It's finished, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a difficult process, as I think I mentioned in the beginning, because there was no outline to figure out where she wanted everything to go. And then to include the pictures, and then when you put a picture in, the writing would go somewhere else. And so it's a learning process.
And we did self-publish, and that was really rough.
Yeah.
Really. So.
I'm curious about how did she use a typewriter or did she write it longhand?
Oh, good question. Our mother could learn anything, and she used a laptop.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, she started out, of course, on a manual,
Yes.
but as the years, whatever was new, she was there.
Good.
It was at least 5 years she worked on this, probably more, maybe even closer to 10. I don't know.
Wow.
Did she leave notes behind or did she just do it in basically compile it from notes, or did she start structuring it just more from her own mind without a lot of notes she had to pull together?
Lots of notes.
Was she,
Yeah.
and you still have that? Do you find those?
You should see my basement. You don't want to throw any of this away. I mean,
No, you don't want to let it go.
and your storage room too, so.
My storage room as well, yeah, so.
Donna,
Okay,
Robin Everett.
yes.
And I wanted to ask you ladies, what is the biggest surprise that you found in the book?
You first.
Oh,
No. I was surprised at how much land that Mr. Dixon and his son and our grandmother accumulated. And I'm still trying to grasp that, just how much that is. I understand how sections work and how it works, but I'm just trying to grasp how big that was, how much land that really was.
And the way it was described to me in the beginning, how much land he had, it was from Arlington, 10 miles down the Rock Creek. Now, I don't know how accurate that was because now we have the accurate amount of acres, but you know, that was something that I could get my head kind of around. So,
Do any of those hay racks still exist out there?
I don't believe so.
not the racks.
No, I don't believe
That
so.
was a magnificent picture.
Wasn't that cool?
hay rack picture, that was just fabulous. I mean, I've seen how those things work, but I've never seen a picture like that before. I'd like to see a copy of that. Is that in your book?
Yeah, it's in the book.
Pete?
Were those hay racks force powered?
Yes.
Yes, as late as 1953, there was a farmer north of Riverton that used a team of horses in one of those haystackers.
Oh, I wish I'd known that. Well, something that surprised me is, you know, with all our modern technique that we have these days, that picture of the fire, I mean, we were always told about the fire. But when we blew that picture up and we could really see that, just the devastation and how rough that must have been on everyone, you know. And Alvy and Rosemary had to live, we have hunters' cabins, and they had to live in that cabin, you know, from 1934 until 37, when he completed the modern house. So.
How did the fire start?
Oh, funny you should ask. I was just thinking of that. We don't know how it started, but it was believed that it started in the kitchen. And so that narrows it down to probably our grandmother. Oh, you told that? Which she denied. And then our father would tease her about it. I remember him saying, well, you burned the place down. But they didn't know.
How did the depression impact the family?
That's another good question. I think, this is my personal opinion, I don't think it impacted very much because they were rural and the chickens were there and,
Cows
all
were
that.
there.
So,
Their wealth is in land and not in investments.
yeah, good point. Excellent.
Okay, I don't think we're seeing any more questions.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hi. So I have a question. So outside, this is Nora, by the way.
That's my daughter, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I'm the one that's blowing up the messages, but outside of the name that you guys talked about, right, not being able to get the answer to that, were there other questions that you kind of unearthed through kind of the exploratory process, the past like 10 years that you were working on this book that you wish that you would have been able to like learn more about that you just weren't able to find an answer to?
I have a nagging question. Remember I showed the slide of the home ranch, the beautiful log building. And I'm not exactly sure when things went from the home ranch to Arlington. And I wish I had dates for that. We know that on that ranch, 3 generations of LeBeaus have been raised and people have been born there. But I can't get my finger on when they actually went to Arlington. So that's a question for me.
And the other thing is, and she and I went back and forth on this a lot. Okay, we know the first schoolhouse, we know it existed till 1915. But there were other little schools around too, and people got taught like Dad got taught up at Arlington in one of our cabins. And it's really hard to put that together, how that all worked out and probably how education moved on to the McFadden School. I mean, we don't have those details. We don't know about that.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank
Like
you.
I said in the chat, kudos to both of you. I know that it was heart, blood, and sweat and tears to get this done. So, and your mom Grammy was a good writer. So beautiful author.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions we have on the live end. So, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Very much, ladies.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. We really
That was
appreciate it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I grew up in there. I mean, I've lived there since I can see.
Yes.
There's so much identification with Rock River, the association.
I'm here.
I grew up.
Did you have a few things?
Interstate 30 was the way across.
I'm sorry?
Grew up through Arlington in those days, so I did that. Arlington itself didn't mean a whole lot to me.
Right.
Growing up, because that whole, what you call, is Rock Creek and Rock River the same, or are they different?
Rock River is a town. Rock River, we always know is a town.
Is Rock Creek nearby?
Yes.
So it's more the way they named the town as opposed to.
Did you have a few things you wanted to say to wrap us up, and then maybe Robin had a few things?
I think they're just answering a couple of questions in house, but
It said that the Homestead Act of 1862 ended in the early 20th century.
We're having a hard time hearing the questions.
Once again, north of Riverton was settled by veterans of World War II and Korea by a Homestead Act of 1862. I'm pretty sure it was, I remember them saying that. Now, they could have been wrong, but I know that the veterans did homestead out there.
Okay. One thing I will add that
I know, I should have said.
They want you to
I
get,
didn't know that there was a Desert Lands Act. And what that meant was you had to prove that you could get water to it. So, are we needed?
I think
Yes.
there was a couple more
Few more
maybe.
questions. Okay, we're back.
Yeah, I don't think we had any questions. We just wanted to know if there was, Tom, if you had any comments you wanted to wrap up with. I know Robin's got a few on our end.
No, I just want to thank them for coming out and talking. It was a nice crowd out here and nice to partner with you guys. And if anyone's traveling through Rawlins, stop by the Carbon County Museum and discover some more local history. And but yeah, it was a pleasure having them speak with us tonight. And thank you all for sharing that opportunity.
And it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ladies, thank you very much.
The book title and the website.
Donna? Could you-
We'll get you the book title.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, it looks like they.
So, I just wanted to remind you that we have 2 programs this month.